to introduce our STEAM panel. First of all, we have Adriana Alvarez. She is a 28-year-old working mother from Cicero, Illinois. She's worked for McDonald's for 10 years. She's a leader in the Fight for 15 movement. She's been on strike a dozen times, has even been arrested on several occasions. She played an instrumental role in driving Illinois to become the first state in the Midwest to pass a $15 minimum wage. And she is a leader at the store where she works. And she travels around the state and also around the world, meeting with union leaders and workers to push the Fight for 15. Thank you, Adriana. Stacey Davis Gates is the vice president of the Chicago Teachers Union, the mighty Chicago Teachers Union, and the executive vice president of the Illinois Federation of Teachers. This past fall, she helped to lead the 15-day strike in Chicago, the teacher strike, successful teacher strike, and she also was a high school social studies teacher for over a decade. Thank you, Stacey Davis Gates, for being here. Sarah Nelson. She is the international president of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, since 2014. She's currently serving her second four-year term as head of the union. She became a union member in 1996 when she was hired as a flight attendant at United Airlines. And today she represents 50,000 flight attendants at her union. She is also an executive council member of the AFL-CIO and was a member of the Biden-Bernie Unity Task Force recently. Thank you, Sarah Nelson. And finally, Sean Richmond. It's been a decade and a half as a union organizer and representative. He is the program director of the Harry Van Arsdale Jr. School of Labor Studies at SUNY Empire State College. And he is also a very experienced writer about the labor movement. His latest book is Tell the Bosses We're Coming, a new action plan for workers in the 21st century. Everybody's required to buy it after the panel. Thank you, Sean. Just to get started, I thought before we get deep into the politics, we're in the middle of a crisis, and the important part of the labor movement is the workers themselves. So I just wanted to go around and sort of check in and give people a chance to say how the workers that you work with are doing in this crisis. And Adriana, I'd like to start with you. I wonder if you could just tell us a bit about what your job has been like since the beginning of the pandemic and how people are doing.
Well, thank you, Hamilton. It's been rough, to say the least, having to go to work, basically getting the same poverty wages that we've gotten before. And, there's a whole lot more risk now with this pandemic going on, and we're at the front lines. We're deemed essential, we've been essential, and it's kind of sad that it takes a pandemic for them to actually realize that we're essential. But it's been a bit rough. We're hanging in there. Again, grateful to actually have a job and be able to still provide, obviously. But it's been really stressful aside from before.
Thank you. And Stacey, can you talk a little bit about how your members are doing just in terms of having to work through this pandemic?
It's been intense. Our members went from standing up in front of a whiteboard to sitting down in front of, Zoom screens. I would like to say that we've been building a plane while flying a plane full of passengers. And so, it's been daunting. We've seen great innovation, but, we also see people very anxious, very fearful. But we've also seen this resilience that teachers have honed throughout this country, especially now. I think one of the things, too, that some of our members are grateful for is the appreciation that they are receiving universally as practitioners of the common good, as people who have anchored families in this moment. So it's a mixed bag, and the last thing I would say is that resentfulness, is also bubbling up to the top, because I think many of our educators, our members, believe that having to be so demanding, aggressive, and militant to protect themselves, their students, and all of our families was unnecessary. So there's a sense of resentment there as well.
Thank you. And Sarah Nelson, travel and aviation have obviously been some of the most impacted industries by this crisis. How are your members doing these days? I think you're muted. Okay. Thanks.
First of all, I just want to note that we shouldn't pass over the fact that it shouldn't be this hard to do the right thing, but CTU did the right thing and threatened to strike so they could actually have a safe plan for the students and the teachers and for the common good. And so we shouldn't pass over that win, because that was a tremendous win in Chicago, even though it's really ridiculous that we have to fight like that just to do the right thing. And that's, you know, that's what we're finding in the airline industry too. We've seen crisis before. We saw after 9/11 how the few with control and money tried to take more control and more money and use that crisis to their own enrichment. And that's what they did. They took all the airlines into bankruptcy. They canceled our pensions, diminished our health care, tried to take away retiree health care, cut our pay by 40%. We were just barely climbing back in this moment, and then coronavirus hits. We were supposed to have industry-wide bargaining, the closest thing you could have to sectoral bargaining, because we're 80% organized in the airline industry. That was supposed to happen this year, where we were finally going to get our fair share of the profits that we helped create. But instead, coronavirus hit. We are essential workers, so we've had to go to work, and yet there hasn't been enough work to go around. In March, of course, we proposed a workers first relief package rather than a corporate bailout, and we got that. We won that. A lot of people have been confused about that because they're so used to the trickle down and the corporations winning. But we actually defined this so that it was built from the ground up. The money can only go to the workers. It has to pay for our pay and benefits. That means we continue our healthcare in a country where for-profit healthcare and employer-based healthcare is how you have healthcare right now, which we have to change. But right now, that's the way it is. So keeping tied to our jobs has also saved our retirement contributions. And what it did, actually, Hamilton, was this is pretty extraordinary. We also banned stock buybacks and dividends and capped executive compensation. And just last week, I was on Squawk Box on CNBC, and they were complaining that we may get an extension of this relief program. And this relief program is all about keeping people in our jobs. So we're facing hundreds of thousands of layoffs this fall if this program is not extended. And when 16 Republican senators signed a letter saying that they support this, and it was showing overwhelming support in Congress for extending this, the stock market jumped on airline shares. And so CNBC was complaining about the fact that this program was actually going to give the airline industry stocks an unfair advantage. And what I have to say is, in every other case in history, the stock market has jumped when people have been laid off, when it is in direct inverse order of the way that workers are treated and the way that Wall Street benefits. And we actually changed through our program. Not only did we keep people connected to their jobs and totally change this, but we changed the behavior of Wall Street. Wall Street was actually betting on these stocks because we have a program that's going to keep people in their jobs. And that was historic too. So we're out here fighting, and we're fighting for something different, but there are people who want to say that we can just say that Congress is never going to act, that our government doesn't work for us. That gets people to check out. And it also gives them an excuse not to act. So what I'm going to say right now really quickly is that everybody thinks that Congress went home and that these executive orders sort of, confused everyone and took everybody off in a different direction. The fact of the matter is that this election, this November, is not just a presidential election. And these assholes better get back to the table right now. We have to demand that. We can't just say, oh, they're never going to do anything, because that's the excuse not to do anything. So the labor movement and building up the labor movement is the way that we're actually going to force leadership and force results. And that's what we have to be doing right now.
Thank you. Yeah. And, we'll get a little deeper into the specific issues, but, you talk about building up the labor movement and exercising power for the labor movement. And Sean, this is to some extent the topic of your book. So I wonder if you could just talk about your ideas for the path to power for the labor movement as a whole.
So, excuse me, the Biden-Harris administration has basically 2 years to do everything in their power to grow the labor movement by several million members, or else the Democrats will lose the midterm elections in 2022 and progress will be stopped and we'll just go through the same, we'll just re-experience the Obama administration. Now, I think they understand that that is their duty, that they have to do that. I worry that they don't know how to do that. And one of the reasons they don't know how to do that is, frankly, most union leaders don't know how to do that. And I'm not being critical. I mean, I'm not even sure I know how to do that, right? Like it's really a challenge. And one of the real problems is that the progressive think tank world is so anemic that a lot of the crucial work of just sort of thinking out loud about regulatory powers, about legal strategies, it didn't get done. So that's a little bit of a worry for me. I mean, in my book, I have ideas in there about some legislative changes. We need sort of all-in systems of labor representation on day one. But what we really need is an administration that's going to focus on building the power of workers and not just unions as institutions. We need to give fast food workers the ability to take action on the job and not get punished for it, right? So I talk about wage boards. I think we should look at works councils. I think that we need a just cause right to your job. That would really go a long way towards giving workers more of a feeling that they can take action. On the PRO Act itself, which is sort of, it's the Democratic Party position on reforming the National Labor Relations Act. It's this extremely ironic thing that it would essentially repeal the Taft-Hartley Act, which is only the AFL's top legislative goal since it was founded, and it's suddenly not good enough. It won't get us out of the economic crisis. It won't seriously bring back, it won't get us millions of new union members. In terms of all the things that it does well, it misses some of the things that, again, because we're not thinking out loud, it doesn't address the preamble of the act. What we need is for Congress to put some constitutional theory into labor law, which currently is based on Congress's right to regulate commerce, and not on our First Amendment rights of free assembly, our Fifth Amendment rights of due process, our 13th Amendment rights to be free from involuntary servitude, and our 14th Amendment rights of equal protection. That should be put in there. But beyond that, there should be language in there that tells judges to fuck off. Most of what's wrong with labor law is judge-made law. And and judges get to make this law because they can just sort of pretend that they're interpreting Congress's intent. Well, Congress can say our intent is that you should stay out of it, and we're directing the NLRB to ignore all Supreme Court precedent on labor law and just issue decisions based upon this century. They can do that, and they should do that. Now, that's laws, and I think we're all very cynical about whether any laws can get passed. So one thing, though, that a president has absolute control over, and Trump's presidency really, ironically, should be a model for us, is over the appointments and the rulemaking at the NLRB. The Obama board moved too slowly in the first term because they're worried about precedent. So on this ridiculous, the graduate employee unions, which have ping-ponged back and forth about whether they're workers or not, depending on from Clinton administration to Bush, Obama's board moved very slowly and methodically to overturn that decision and to give them back their rights as workers. And Trump just comes in and says, fuck it, we're gonna, because we have the votes, we're gonna undo it. We should do the same thing. Let's not be slow and methodical. Let's just issue some decisions because we only have 2 years. There's no more norms anymore also. I mean, this is, there's a gentleman's agreement between the Democratic and Republican Party that the president will nominate 3 members of his party and 2 members of the other party to the 5 seats on the NLRB. It's not in the law. It's just an agreement. You've got the point now where, you know, Trump is not appointing Democrats. He's just holding seats empty. And his appointees are openly disdainful of their statutory mission, which is to encourage collective bargaining. Biden should appoint only representatives to the NLRB who are going to uphold the statutory mission, with no regard to party label. Or if you want party label, put 3 Democrats and 2 members of the Working Families Party. So, you know, and here's another thing that they can do. You know, the Trump NLRB right now is trying to overturn this really old precedent called Excelsior, which is the idea that when there's a union election scheduled several days out, you know, several weeks out from the election, you get a list of the workers who can vote and their home addresses. And they're trying to take that away. What we could do, what a Biden administration could do, is actually go back to an equal time standard in union certification elections. Bosses have a First Amendment right to conduct captive audience meetings. And in these meetings, they threaten people's jobs, they lie about the legal rights. Once upon a time, again, ping pong back and forth, depending on whether there was a Democratic administration or Republican. Once upon a time, if an employer decided to conduct captive audience meetings, it triggered access to the work site for union organizers to talk to workers at the workplace. And in 1967, that's the last time the AFL-CIO asked the NLRB to reestablish the equal time standard. And what the NLRB declined on that day, but in the decision they said, hey, look, later today, we're issuing a decision in this case called Excelsior Underwear, where we're going to give you home addresses. Try that, and then come back to us if it doesn't work. Did we ever come back to them? So finally, you know, I want to say a word about 1932 and FDR, because I think that there are things that we, as the left, tell ourselves that are frankly unhelpful. We tell ourselves that there can only be change if we get the general strike going, if we get the sit-down strikes going. And I think we also tell ourselves, you know, this sort of fables of the New Deal, as if it all just sort of came down at once. It didn't. Most of us would have hated Roosevelt in 1932 and 1933. The entire thrust of his first year or two was entirely pro-corporate. You know, his first idea to get out of the Great Depression was to allow corporations to collude over prices. And he dealt unions into that first National Industrial Recovery Act just because it was so controversial, he didn't need any opposition. So as these companies would collude over prices, they also had to establish a labor code, and they had to meet with any representative of the workers that was legitimate. By the way, the communist unions got dealt in on that. And you know, and then it guaranteed a right to organize that wasn't worth the paper it was written on. There was no enforcement mechanism to it. The steel companies were still shooting union organizers, you know, on the picket line. But what it did is it raised workers' expectations, raised their hopes, and then dashed their expectations just enough that it really did spark a strike wave in 1934. And that's the strike wave that got us the National Labor Relations Act. So that's sort of, I think, what we should be expecting here is we're not going to get enough from Biden, but it might be just enough to get some more stuff moving in this country.
Thanks. And to kind of keep on that theme of organizing and power, which are going to be vital to anything we do. Adriana, tell me, you know, for the Fight for 15, this is a little bit of a two-part question, but has the pandemic increased interest in the Fight for 15? And the second part is the Fight for 15, do you feel like it's ever going to actually become a union movement as opposed to sort of a movement for higher wages?
Well, definitely, you know, people are starting to realize exactly what, you know, a union for fast food workers could mean during all this crazy stuff going on. And a lot more people have been on board, actually realizing, you know, what they're worth and what, you know, what could be happening instead of what is happening. And, you know, I feel like the 515 can definitely become, you know, we've always asked for 15 and a union. We can't have one without the other. You know, they can give us $20, but then they'll give us 2 hours a day. So we definitely need that union. And I feel like, you know, the more that we keep pushing, we're gonna get there. I mean, we've already gotten part of it in some places, and we're gonna keep pushing until we get that union to be able to get that protection, that voice on the job. So definitely.
And Stacy, you know, I really feel like Chicago Teachers Union, probably one of the most badass unions in the country. And, you know, the Chicago teacher strike was such a kind of model for union power. I guess my question really is, how do you spread that to the rest of the labor movement? You know, why isn't every union doing what you all are doing? And how do you kind of spread that bargaining for the common good and that power that you all have nationwide?
Well, you know, here in Chicago, you know, we're very clear about how difficult it is to win at a negotiating table. A lot of the issues that our labor siblings in red states deal with, we deal with here in Chicago as well. The marginalization of our rights, the issues with, you know, politicians picking you up one day, putting you down the next day. And so, like, our strategy is clear. We believe in ourselves. If we win, it's not because we made a great compromise, we cut a deal. It's because we've taken what we've needed in that moment from whomever has it. You only can trust, quite frankly, your ability to connect with your members, to meet their needs, but to also make sure that the members understand that they're in charge of how strong, how militant, how clear their union is. Like, yes, I get to lead and I'm happy to lead, but I can't lead myself. There has to be a strategy that not just involves the idea of a contract, but how does that contract help you leverage common good benefits? I live on the south side of Chicago. My check, my benefits are only as good as my neighborhood is. Am I overly surveilled? Only as good as my neighborhood is. Are my neighbors losing their homes? Do my neighbors who are retired public employees still have retirement security? And so you have to connect our lives as workers into racial, into social, into economic justice. And so you have to have an infrastructure that says, number one, no one ever gives us anything, which is clear to me. I'm Black, I'm female. No one gives me anything. I get it because I earn it. I get it because I take it. And so that is how we think about our power in Chicago. That is how we see the labor movement. Look, and I'm also a history teacher. I don't remember labor ever becoming labor because someone said, okay, let's give you a weekend. Okay, let's give you a fair wage. Okay, this is the right thing to do. Like when, you know? And so being clear about who the enemy is, being clear about where your power exists, and also being clear that you are a part of a larger, broader community where if I fight for a thing, it has to benefit the common good. And I have to tell you, it is even more so clear to us as educators. Look, when school shut down, you saw the social safety net and communities obliterated, right? From childcare to breakfast and lunch, to shelter, right? And so you have to be clear too, as educators. If students are homeless, you have to advocate for affordable housing. If students are hungry, you have to advocate for grocery stores in their community. And if parents are unemployed, well, you got to be out there with them advocating for living wages. That's why the Fight for 15 is so vitally important to us. You know how many of our parents punch clocks at fast food restaurants, and what it would mean for them to have more sick pay leave, what it would mean for them to make a fair wage and have health care that matters. That impacts our school communities. So we're all connected. And I think our understanding and acceptance of being a member of a larger community has propelled our power. It's not just power for the sake of having it, it's power for the sake of leveraging it and making sure we all get to share in the fruits of that.
And Sarah, you know, it seems like the reality of the labor movement in America today is like there's spots of power. You know, there's power maybe in Chicago, there's power in a certain industry, but there's not a nationwide sense of power from the labor movement. How does the labor movement exercise power on a national scale?
Well, I think Sean was hitting on it, on raising workers' expectations. You know, when people are beaten down, when more and more is taken from them, when they get to desperate situations, that can make them hungry for anything. And you can see that in a lot of places. You can see that in the documentary American Factory. But you know, when you do what Stacy is talking about, and you actually start with what is labor's power is solidarity, and labor's power is ultimately withholding our labor. And so that's why I say, actually, that the most important labor right is the right to strike, because the strike is a tactic. Solidarity is our power. But workers have to understand the power that they have. And so if you are constantly organizing to strike over the issues that are defined by those conversations, when you have a rank and file strategy, where you're actually talking with your members about what they're experiencing, you know, it's about what's happening at work, but what's happening at work is also happening in the community, like Stacy's talking about. And I love to look at what CTU did in this last strike, because I think about the way that they stood with SEIU and lifted tens of thousands of people out of poverty by saying that we're not going to move unless we lift everyone up, by saying that you can't bribe us with a raise because that is not going to fix the fact that I have kids who don't have a home and are coming unprepared to class, if they can get there and even have a chance. They can't eat, so they can't concentrate in my classroom. Oh, and by the way, when you have so many kids packed into this room, I don't have time to see them. I don't have time to connect with them and lift them up. And finally, you know, what really got to me was their demand for those nurses in the schools. Because I think about those parents who are working 2 and 3 jobs and not understanding why their kid can't get into his schoolwork. And it just took the nurse to recognize that, oh, they're having a problem seeing, and so we're going to get them some glasses so they can engage. Oh, they're having a problem hearing, so they can't hear what's going on. And that's going to change that kid's life forever. But that's also going to raise expectations about how we take care of each other and what we can expect in our communities. And so I actually believe that the way to move the labor movement is to have people on a national level, to have, you know, a charismatic spokesperson talking about what these powers, these pockets of power that are happening all over the labor movement, where people get this, where they're running a rank and file strategy, where they're connecting it to the community issues, and we're letting workers know this is the power that you can have. And it starts with your right to withhold your labor. And it starts with you connecting with other people, because this is not a self-selection process. We're all in the workplace together. We didn't decide to come here together. The boss hired us, but we have more in common than anything that can ever divide us. And when you get out on the picket line, and you start telling each other's stories, and you start connecting on that, we see every single time that people move politically. It doesn't start with who's running for office and can we have a savior who's gonna take care of us. That we are outsourcing our power every time we are approaching politics that way. So this very discussion about what can the Biden administration do, the Biden administration is going to do what we force them to do. And so we just need to have this story out, and we need to have the ability to tell it. And I believe people are going to come where you get results and where you know that you can make a difference, and where Adriana is talking about, yeah, guess what? By coming together, we won. We won a higher wage. We won on sexual harassment in the workplace. We won on these things. You can win when you come together, but we're never going to have a sustained win unless we have a sustained right to our unions. and to keep this and to continue to build on it. So, you know, we need to share the word because people are hurting. They're looking for leadership. There is no goddamn leadership in this country anywhere, and the labor movement can give it. And so that's what I'm hoping we can do. And I'll just say here, I want to do it.
All right, heard it here first. We'll start planning the general strike after this panel. Sean, you know, tying into this all is the fact that there's 30 to 50 million unemployed people right now. And as you all know, American labor law is not conducive to giving power to unemployed people. What does the labor movement do in terms of exercising power with this huge pool of unemployed people we have right now?
Can I talk about strikes first? Well,
Yes, please.
That $50 million question. Because strikes are a place where the Biden administration can do something very, very concrete, and they don't need Congress for it. We don't actually have a right to strike in this country because a right to strike, a real right to strike, would have to include a right to return to the job when the strike is over. And there was a terrible Supreme Court decision in 1938 that allows employers to permanently replace strikers on a so-called economic strike. There's nothing in the law about this. This is a made-up whole cloth by the judges, and it sat there for decades until the union busting drive of the 1980s when that decision got weaponized and it became the playbook. And one of the things about strikes is striking is contagious, but it can go in both directions. Right now, there's an uptick in strikes because workers are seeing that as a pathway to winning. But in the 1980s, strikes really struck a lot of workers as a losing strategy because a lot of workers got permanently replaced. Now, the thing about that decision is the Supreme Court said two things in it that a pro-worker NLRB can really get aggressive with bosses on. It says, A, that there can't be any anti-union animus involved in their decision to permanently replace the strikers. You could that's why ULP strikes are where you get to keep your job. But you could much more aggressively pursue that. What is bargaining your workers to impasse over draconian concessions, but anti-union animus? It's clear in the activity. The Obama board, very late in the game, started to play around with this, but it was like the last year. It was 2015. But the other thing that the Supreme Court said must be in place in order for an employer to permanently replace the strikers is that it has to be necessary to protect and continue his business. I'd like to see the Verizon Corporation have to open up their books and prove how marginal their business is, that it's essential that they permanently replace the strikers. I want to see United Airlines have to do that. I think if the NLRB took the actual text of the McKay decision and enforced it, we get our right to strike back, and we actually have a much larger uptick in strikes. How do unemployed people go on strike? I'm not sure. I mean, that's, I've been doing a lot of interviews here, and my one quip is I can't wait till we all get back to work so we can immediately turn around.
Hey guys, you're all back, and we're back on broadcast.
All right, we back. Not sure if we lost. There's Adriana.
All right, can you guys hear me? Yeah.
Yes. Wow. I think the CIA heard you all talking and shut us down for a minute there, apparently.
I think you might be right.
I think it's possible, yeah. Okay, well, hopefully Stacy will come back. Maybe somebody can email her, but we'll forge ahead. We got 10 more minutes. So I wanted to, before we wrap, to just touch on the Black Lives Matter movement and the kind of uprising that America is seeing right now in general. Biggest social movement since the Civil Rights Movement is happening in America right now. And, a lot of us are wondering what role the labor movement has to play in that. So Adriana, maybe I wonder if you could just talk about how you kind of see the Fight for 15 in the context of all the other protests and everything else that's happening right now, what do you see the Fight for 15's role as in that?
Well, we're definitely all connected. We can't have one thing without the other, just like with 15 and a union, we can't have one without the other. We can't have economic justice without having racial justice. So we're definitely a part of that. A lot of our workers are, Black as well. We have Latinos, but the majority is, the Black workers, Hispanic workers. So we're definitely all coming together and, doing whatever it is that we have to do to make sure that justice is served. And, we can't have one without the other. We can't do economic justice without having racial justice. So we have to fix it all with one punch so that it'll stay fixed. It's been a long time coming, and I feel like we have to keep pushing.
All right, and Stacy, you're back. You got back just in time. Honestly, the same question, which is, what's the role of the labor movement in the broader kind of uprising that's going on right now, the Black Lives Matter movement and the sort of millions of people that are in the streets right now? What's the labor movement's role and what are we doing in that context?
I think it's manifold. One thing that I think it is that we have to look inward at our own practices as labor. If we're labor in this moment and you don't see women in positions of authority, if you don't see Black folks in positions of authority, Latinx folks in positions of authority that bring with them their experience in their leading of that union, then we got a lot of work to do, right? So, you start at home and do some introspection and some reflection, and then you begin to transform your own situation. But on a larger level, how are we allied with those who are leading the cause right now? I am clear that those who are leading the Black Lives Movement are clear, brilliant, fearless, and necessary. How are we allying ourselves with them? How are we making sure that they have the support that's necessary? How are we building shields around that movement so it can go as far as it needs to go? How are we incorporating the policies that they are asking for into our legislative agendas? How are we making sure that we are a part of a larger movement for justice, right? You can't say, I take your dues money and not also say that your life matters to me. It's one and the same thing. And so I think we would be good to have a clear line on policing. I do. Straight up truth, we have the battle within our union, right? In terms of how folks see it. Cops are married to nurses and teachers. At least they are in Chicago. They could be in other places as well, but in Chicago they are. And what does that mean? It means that we have a lot of tough discussions within our membership that at the end of the discussion, people are still in disagreement. And it's still the right thing to do, right? You can't work in a school district that serves Black children and Black families and communities that are Black and not put value on their life. You cannot. And if you are, shame on you.
I just point out that my union, Writers Guild East, called on the AFL-CIO to kick out police unions, and we're hoping that some other unions will join us in that one of these days. But Sarah, I want to give you a chance to touch on the same question, labor movement in the context of kind of the broader movement that's happening in America today.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, we just have to, the labor movement is not going to organize on the scale that it needs to organize on unless we make fundamental, first priority, making it clear that the labor movement is for every worker. Every worker. Work does not stop at borders, by the way. Every single worker is part of the labor movement. And so I just think about my own union and the fact that it's been very, very clear that we have had to battle against sexism our entire history, and that it has been about trying to diminish our power as women. And even, that's why our union was formed in 1946. And so we have been, pushing on social justice issues because they're directly related to economic issues. And we understand that already. And so when the Me Too movement broke And we were talking about, what's happening with flight attendants still today, because our industry was so set up to sexualize flight attendants and actually sold tickets based on ads with a flight attendant dressed up to say, "I'm Cheryl, fly me," things like that. It also translated to the bargaining table, so that when we were there, that, you know, management, like a flight attendant told me on the first day on the job, they think of us as their wives or their mistresses, and in either place they hold us in contempt. Your only place of power is with your fellow flying partners, and if we stick together, there's nothing we can't accomplish. So we took care of ourselves, and we built up our career, and we built up the fact that we're certified and that we're required to be on that plane. That plane doesn't go without us because of our work. And so we built our power in that way. But when that Me Too movement broke and we were asking people to tell their stories about what they experienced on the job, we were not hearing from men. And I can tell you right now, I've seen men harassed on the job in a much more grotesque way even than women, because the entire career has been talked about as objectified, right? And so people think that they can just own flight attendants because it's been set up that way. And I asked my fellow flying partners, why are you not speaking up as a man? I know I've seen you be sexually harassed on the plane and assaulted even. And they said, "Sarah, we are in a workforce of 80% women. This is a moment for women to claim their power. And if women don't claim their power, we are never going to have the kind of power that we need to move our careers forward at the bargaining table. So we're going to shut up and support our sisters." So when this movement broke, this was a time to talk about Black Lives Matter. And it's not a time for the rest of us to be bringing up our issues. It's a time for us to be resolute about that. And I will tell you that there were people who came to us and said, "I thought my union was only a white woman's union, but now I want to be engaged because you just talked about me and you just saw me. And you have to understand that every day when I come to work, I hope to God that there's going to be one more person of color on my trip, because it's going to make all the difference in my experience on the job." And I've been having to hold that in all this time. And now you're letting me talk about this. You're letting me talk about the fact that the trips to Europe, to Amsterdam, and to Frankfurt take off without fail. But the gate right next door that's going to Nigeria, that flight was held for 4 days. And Delta let families stay there in the gate room without any food and nowhere to go, because it didn't matter that the flight to Nigeria wasn't taking off, and that it's on a plane that's not as nice as the ones going to Amsterdam and to Frankfurt. And I, as a Black woman coming to work, do you know what that tells me about what my company thinks about me? These are the kind of issues that we get to bring forward when we say, we are going to stand, we see you. And we're going to make space in our union halls for you to tell your stories and to help other people understand your struggle. Because until we hear your struggle and understand your struggle and stand with you in your struggle, the rest of us have our power undercut. That's just the truth. And so that's why we have to make this fundamental and why we have to be a part of this movement.
Well, thank you. And our time is up. I'm sorry that the CIA shut us down for 15 minutes in the middle there, but I really want to thank all of you for being on this panel. I thought it was great. Thank you, Adriana. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sean. And thank you to everyone who watched. I'm sorry we didn't get to audience questions, but thanks for coming out, and start general strike planning right now.
Election Day 2020, general strike. I'm calling it now. General strike, election day. We're going to vote.
Yes.
Hell yeah. All right. Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.